In his bid to put clear water between himself and Jeremy Corbyn, Keir Starmer has once again thrown Palestinians under the bus. This week he spoke to the Jewish Chronicle and said this.
Let me ask you, by extension, a question about Israel. You've spoken very fondly and warmly about Israel. In Israel, as you know...
But we have extended family there.
Of course. So as you'll know, citizens of Arab origin are represented throughout society, all the way up to being represented in government, Arab ministers in government. And yet Amnesty International recently released a report where they accused Israel of being an apartheid state. That was embraced and supported by many members of your party, particularly on the left. Do you agree with them?
No. I've been very clear about that, and that is not the Labour Party position. So I was very clear, I think, in my comments to Labour Friends of Israel exactly where I stand on most of the major issues that obviously and understandably concern people in Israel and beyond Israel. So I was able to address a number of those issues in that speech.
And will you make those same points at party conference this year?
Yes, I've got no reason not to. I was on the platform when we made the rule change at last year's party conference in relation to the way that we would deal with complaints of anti-Semitism.
Did Keir Starmer just commit to using his Labour Party conference speech to attacking Amnesty International for criticising Israeli apartheid? It would seem a strange commitment to me, although we know that Keir Starmer's commitments don't count for very much. To remind you what Amnesty have said on the issue, whether they live in Gaza, East Jerusalem and the rest of the West Bank, or Israel itself, Palestinians are treated as an inferior racial group and systematically deprived of their rights. We found that Israel's cruel policies of segregation, dispossession and exclusion across all territories under its control clearly amount to apartheid. The international community has an obligation to act. Amnesty's position has been echoed in reports by Human Rights Watch and the Israeli human rights group B'Tselem. Both have said Israel practice apartheid. Keir Starmer, former human rights lawyer, he disagrees. Finally, you heard Starmer there point to his speech to Labour Friends of Israel as his definitive position on Israel-Palestine. I made my position clear in that speech. Well, we discussed that speech at the time. It included statements such as this. We will continue to support Israel's robust democracy, its independent judiciary, and its commitment to the rule of law. Israel is a nation with a vibrant media, free trade unions, and a lively tradition of debate, dissent, and disagreement, as well as the rights won by the struggle of the women's movement, the LGBT community, and religious and racial minorities. If you're a Labour leader and you're looking to Israel for an example of where racial minorities are treated really well, I'm a bit worried about you taking charge of this country. Starmer, in that speech, also approvingly repeated Harold Wilson's phenomenally racist claim that Israel was an example of social democrats who made the desert bloom, as if Palestinians didn't know how to grow anything.
There is clearly in this country a hierarchy of racisms. Mesna Cato, an academic at Cambridge, has come up with a very good definition of what she calls anti-Palestinianism, which includes Nakba denial, just as I'm not invited to sit at the dinner table with people who deny the truth of the massacre of my family members in the Holocaust. It should not be forced upon Palestinians that they're expected to hang out with people who think it's legitimate that their family members were ethnically cleansed. That's not to draw to say that these two things are identical. No atrocities in history are identical, or they're the same in scale. But people who deny atrocities shouldn't be taken as serious, responsible, respectable people, and yet they are, and yet the state that they run is treated as a key Western ally. The definition also includes accusing Palestinians of latent racism without cause, which is a common trope and a problem in our politics today. But there's another telling thing here, a subtler instance of this racism. How can Israel be called a democracy? Starmer keeps doing it. 4 million people or more live under siege or under direct military occupation ruled by the Israeli state, with no political rights, or even, Starmer, the human rights lawyer, no right to a civilian trial. People under Israeli occupation, Palestinians, are hauled to military courts with a 99% conviction rate. And Israel's the only nation in the world which tries children in front of those military courts. And what of the current Israeli government? Starmer singled it out for praise. It's a government that has banned the 6 leading human rights organizations in the state of Israel as terrorist organizations. It's approved plans to build 300 illegal homes for settlers in the West Bank while demolishing 17 Palestinian schools in the West Bank, including one funded by the European Union. I think this makes sense only if you understand, and this is why one of the reasons this issue matters so much now in British politics, the kind of lightning rod, is because democracy, when it's applied to the state of Israel, doesn't mean anything about freedom or voting. It's a kind of racialized language. It means the civilized world against the barbarians, right? Democracy is something that we white Westerners in suits have against the savages and their kind of frightening global supporters. And that's how this projected image of Israel makes sense. This very removed image of Israel, the land of Amos Oz, Starmer said in that speech, the land of Yitzhak Rabin, whose supporters get almost no votes in Israel now. The land of the two-state solution, Starmer praised, though Israel's current prime minister writes articles in the New York Times explicitly ruling out a two-state solution. This kind of strange projection in Israel out of kilter with the facts of a country increasingly moving towards the far right makes sense because Israel serves as a kind of cipher for civilization facing the savage hordes. And Starmer's politics against those like Jeremy Corbyn, whose radicalism involved anti-colonialism, Starmer's politics are all about the defense of Western civilization with all of the violence and power and inequality that involves. You know, the West was his idol, Starmer's spokesman said, after threatening Labour MPs who criticised NATO. Labour now stands behind NATO and the West, he said. People should look at Oliver Eagleton's excellent book coming out soon, The Starmer Project, which is very good on this. This is a politics which is all about the defense of noxious, violent hierarchies, the nation, the West, empire. And Israel is important because it represents that frontier of civilization against the savages, just as the settler colonists in South Africa once did. It'll then be framed as about protecting Jews, and we'll get conscripted Jews into that civilizational battle. But it's really about finding a convenient kind of hammer with which to attack Muslims, Arabs, the colonized, and those on the global left who are scary, not for wanting to redistribute wealth, maybe some of that's acceptable, but for challenging the interests of an imperial world system.
One thing that really frustrated me about that interview from Keir Starmer was the timing of it as well. And just because it really put in view the contrast between how the political class media pundits treat Palestine and how they treat other issues where a British ally is involved. And why I say this, because as I said, Human Rights Watch is one of the very prestigious organizations that has said that Israel practices apartheid. Human Rights Watch put out a report earlier this week about war crimes in Bucha. So in Ukraine, war crimes committed by the Russian military. We presented that in the show. We've got no reason to doubt what was in it. It seems like a good document. We essentially accept its content. But people who don't, there are a few people online who don't. The moment they don't, they're called a conspiracy theorist, a Russian stooge, an Assadist. Paul Mason saying, they should be kicked out of the Labour Party. And that's for saying, oh, I don't believe what this human rights organization has said. Now, as I say, I believe what Human Rights Watch said about Bucha, and I believe what they say about Palestine. But Keir Starmer, today, in full public view, has said Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, they all say that Israel is an apartheid state. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. Now, can you imagine if a mainstream UK politician was asked, Human Rights Watch have said that there were war crimes committed in Bucha. Do you accept that? Imagine if they just said, no, our party position is clear. There were no war crimes committed in Bucha. Whatever Human Rights Watch says, they're wrong. What he's done is the equivalent of that, right? It just so happens that the Palestinians aren't our allies and the Ukrainians are. And that means that he's allowed to get away with it. And it is just the hypocrisy of it, I find completely mind-blowing. It's in large part, this is about who Britain is allied with. There could also be a hierarchy of racism thing going on here, or just it doesn't serve anyone with any power. It doesn't serve their interests to say, wait a minute, Keir Starmer, he's ignored what Human Rights Watch said. He said that all of these human rights experts are fools and mistaken. Surely that deserves some scrutiny. No one thinks that's in their interest, who's powerful, but they do think it's worth their time really haranguing Jeremy Corbyn because he signed a Stop the War statement that said that maybe NATO was involved in the start of the war. I don't actually agree with everything that was in that Stop the War statement, but it was way more acceptable than being in an interview being said, do you accept this very prestigious human rights organization's very well documented claim that Israel practices apartheid? And you just say, without qualification, without any shame, no, we don't. Not our party position. Sorry. This isn't about a party position. It's about facts. Facts on the ground. Do you accept the facts? And no, he doesn't accept the facts. And I don't know why. Is it because he, as Barnaby says, so committed to defending empire? Is it because he's overcorrecting? Because Labour struggled with anti-Semitism stories for 5 years? What makes Keir Starmer think he can get away with this?
This is how moral panics work, which is you construct a set of victims who often are real victims facing real problems. It really is true that there's a problem of anti-Semitism around the world. But you articulate that crisis not as a problem that needs to be addressed, but as a resource for worrying about something else. So worrying about anti-Semitism becomes a way of worrying about a crisis of neoliberalism, the return of so-called populism. Class politics gets called anti-Semitic. The headmaster of a leading private school said a couple of years ago, people complaining about the dominance of private schools in public life were like people complaining about Jews dominating public life in Nazi Germany. So populism, class politics all gets cast as suspect and suspicious. Any kind of punching up is attacking Jews, echoing the anti-Semitic view that Jews are all rich and powerful. And then anti-imperialist politics now. This is the sort of novelty of adding Zionism and Israel into the mix. Anti-imperialist and anti-colonial politics in a moment where the West is on shaky ground and where American hegemony is declining, all that can be cast as actually the progeny of dodgy, dangerous kind of extremism and fanaticism. So I think it's a comfortable kind of panic that much of our media isn't very interested in questioning because it fits absolutely into the central kinds of liberal ideological matrices of our times. And of course, Jews get thrown under the bus in a certain kind of way. We're conscripted to a panic that isn't really about us, but much, much more egregiously and aggressively, Palestinians, colonized, assaulted, occupied, abused, bombed, killed, get cast utterly under the bus, utterly abused and ignored in order to be attacked, in order to sustain the defense of a noxious right-wing neoliberal and imperial politics.
You know, you'll probably notice from this show, regular viewers, I often try and stay regularly relaxed about Labour. You know, it's not my project. Yeah, they haven't said something particularly left-wing. I didn't really expect them to anyway. But it's when Keir Starmer just comes out and it's just like, you know, just watching someone so disingenuous about things that matter so much. Like, I just find it, offensive.